Why is the topic of gender and fair pay increasing in importance?
Well, we see initially we started because of the World Economic Forum report and because of the need to look at this issue, why there's an ethical side of things. But then the more we looked into it, the more we saw that businesses are equally interested, and there's things around acquiring and retaining top talent, there's things around regulation that's being introduced around the world in regards to fair pay, gender pay, ethnicity pay, as well as the overall demand within companies to actually get to grips with this and understand what is happening within their companies.
Perfect. So let's look at those three areas in a bit more detail. So starting off with talent.
Yeah, so in terms of talent, we were having a look at some interesting reports from Glassdoor, but also in conversations with our customers around talent retention and talent acquisition. And in terms of talent retention, 52% of employees are likely to leave a job if they find out that they're being paid unfairly, and if they could be paid more fairly somewhere else, or if others of their colleagues, compared to their colleagues or compared to other kind of people in other departments in the organization, they feel that they're not being paid fairly. And Glassdoor is really opening that door for everyone to be able to see that data. Of those 52% of employees who would leave, a large majority are in senior roles. So that is a major problem for companies, and they're increasingly coming up against that and having to take decisions on how to ensure more fair pay and retain that talent. In terms of regulation, countries around the world are introducing legislation around reporting on the gender pay gap. For instance, in the UK, there's legislation that requires companies with over 250 employees to report on their gender pay gap on an annual basis. The US has legislation in different states in the US around equal pay, but also ethnicity and gender pay reporting for companies that provide services or products to the federal government. So now they're having to look into that. France has a more stringent legislation that they've introduced last year around the gender pay gap, where they plan to start penalizing companies if they have a gender pay gap that is higher than 9%. Germany has legislation. So overall, the world is moving towards legislating and regulating this space a bit more. So this is an added pressure for companies to start looking into fair pay and understanding what the pay differences are within their companies. And while they do that, there's research from Gartner that shows that a lot of these companies are not sure that what they're doing is the right thing, and if what they're doing will generate results. And we have a very clear example of this from Salesforce, where Mark Benioff has commissioned an equal pay, gender pay analysis a few years ago with the view of proving that there is no gender pay gap in Salesforce. And then the data came back showing that there is a gender pay gap in Salesforce, and he needed about $3 million to close the gap. So he's convinced everyone to put that $3 million in, close the gap, proudly flying the flag of closing the gender pay gap, only so that a year later, when they look at data again, they were 1 million short of closing the gender pay gap, because within that space, people have moved in and out of the company, they've moved into different roles. So that highlights how the approach that you take is not always the one that would work. So it highlights why there's demand for companies to understand better how they can address this, that is in a way that's cost effective, in a way that will keep employees satisfied, and also will keep them compliant with legislation.
And interesting what you said around the talent part, actually, they can actually make the difference for companies to retain really important talent, whether it's senior or scarce skills, for example, it can actually make the difference, whether they can hire and retain.
Absolutely. Pay still continues to be on the agenda when it comes to attracting top talent. Yes, we have increasingly younger generations that are millennials and Generation X and all other latter letters of the alphabet that are really interested in vision and passion and the kind of the drive of the company and the ethics of the company, but pay still is part of that, and pay fairness actually is even bigger part of that.
Well, it says a lot about a company if they don't have fair pay, really, doesn't it? So what are the business objectives that gender and equal pay feed into?
So from our conversation with businesses, really the objectives are twofold. One is companies that are more diverse and are more inclusive are more likely to have higher returns compared to their competitors. There's research from McKinsey, but also Harvard, in terms of productivity increase in share price growth for companies that have higher proportion of women within their top quartiles than they currently do. There's higher returns for companies that are more ethnically diverse in terms of returns on investment, in terms of share price growth, market acquisition, and market growth. There's also the other side of developing products and services that are fit for the wider population, because if you think around gender, then we have 51% of the population is women, and if a company wants to develop products and services that are fit for everyone, they want to make sure that within their teams they have a diverse representation that will think about everything in an all-rounded kind of manner.
It seems so obvious, doesn't it? But so why are companies so slow to respond to this? Is it because most boards are made up of a bunch of white men in their 50s trying to tackle diversity and not really knowing where to start?
Well, I think that is a catch-22 kind of question, because the boards are what they are because of the lack of women coming through the pipeline into top executive roles. And I think it's a legacy that we've inherited, and we just need to find a way to accelerate that progress and ensure that we facilitate for women to come through and for ethnic minorities to come through into more senior roles and make their way into boards. And on the board question, it's an interesting one, because I was recently in California, and California has introduced legislation that requires boards to have a certain composition that is ethnically and gender diverse. So that is pushing companies even further into thinking how they're going to diversify what they do within the company so they can ensure that they have the talent that they can then put on those boards.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.